What's up, everybody? It's Jordan, and welcome to the Sports Dude Hines Show. Today is May 10th, 2022. This is my first video since after the draft. Have not been able to do a video for a couple weeks now with school and everything like that. But joining me in today's video to talk all things Cincinnati Bengals, I have Frank Laplaca, host of the Unofficial Bengals podcast. How you doing today, Frank?
I'm doing great, Jordan. Can't wait to talk some Bengals with you.
We have a lot to talk about. There's lots of different things. Obviously, the draft, was kind of a major thing for the Bengals. When you look at the draft, there's lots of positions that Bengals fans thought they were going to take, and they might not have took them, or they might have took them, but they took them in the later rounds. We'll go ahead and get started talking about the draft here. Let me just 1 second, having this graphic up here. So in the first round, they ended up taking safety from Michigan University, Daxton Hill. This was interesting because when we did a mock video, like a couple of days before the draft, we kind of had Daxton Hill going to the Bengals with a 31st pick overall. And it's one of those situations where Linderbaum goes to the Ravens and some of these other best player availables, guys who are already took and like, well, crap. Daxton Hill is a great player. He might not be, he might not give us a big air impact than Tyler Linderbaum, the center from Iowa, but I feel like Daxton Hill was a very interesting choice here in round one. So what are your kind of thoughts here with the Bengals taking Daxton Hill, the safety from Michigan, in the first round?
Well, first off, I want to give credit to you, Jordan, because you did call it. That was one of when we did that mock draft, we did 3 different versions a couple weeks back, and you were the one who picked Daxton Hill. So I give you credit on that. You saw the future, and that's good. And as far as he goes on the roster, it's, that's what they're billing him as. He's an athletic, hard-hitting safety, a versatile, young, fresh leg, fast guy to have in the secondary. And overall, if you look at the draft this year, picking 31st, it's hard to get the player that you want. You're watching all these other players that are on your board just go, and you don't necessarily get the player that you want. So because we drafted so low this year, this was the kind of year where you're not necessarily taking an immediate need impact player. You have the luxury of kind of just taking some good players that are going to make your team better. And I think he falls into that category. He obviously can play single high safety. They're saying that he could play inside and outside corner. So he's versatile, but what he brings, he comes from a good program. He's got young, fresh legs, a 4.39 40, and a good pedigree. So it seems like a pretty good addition. I haven't seen much of his college tape, but it seems like this is a guy that you can bring in, and now your defensive backfield room just got a little bit younger and a little bit faster. And I think those are good things.
And when you look at this draft pick here, like I said, Daxton Hill, he was not really a guy who was a super popular pick by Bengals fans. Lots of people were wanting Linderbaum, like myself. Had my friend over, we were watching the draft. We see the Ravens trade back, and back in my head, I'm like, I just know the Ravens are going to take Linderbaum. That's exactly what they did. I mean, they had a tremendous draft, but the Bengals got Hill, and I think that's a good value pick because despite safety might not being your biggest need, he was one of the better players available, and that was everything I pretty much preached the whole draft, off season and in the draft process. Best player available is more important than position need. And Daxton Hill, when you get a guy like him who can really play any of the positions in the secondary, and when you have guys like Jesse Bates and Von Bell who are both going to be free agents 1 year from now, Jesse Bates, I have no idea what's going to happen with him. He wants $18 million. I don't think he's worth $18 million. He needs to be more consistent. If he plays like he did in the playoffs, in our playoff run, I would be kind of more willing to give him that type of money. But we saw Jesse Bates in the regular season. He was nowhere near the 2020 version of Jesse Bates. And Von Bell, a guy who's been nice for the Bengals for the past couple of years, like I said, he's a free agent 1 year from now. So even if we get one of those guys back and we get rid of one of the other ones, we still need safety help. And I think Daxton Hill is a tremendous pick here with a 31st pick overall. Like you mentioned, he ran like a 4.38 40-yard dash. He could play safety and corner. He had 8 pass breakups this past season for Michigan. Nearly 70 tackles. He's a guy who has lots of experience. So I like that pick quite a bit there for the Bengals. And then so we look at the second round pick. We took Cameron Taylor-Britt, the corner from Nebraska. We ended up trading up to select him there with the 60th pick overall. It's interesting. The Bengals don't often trade up, but they traded up twice in this draft. I thought that was really interesting because we don't see it often. And, the corner from Nebraska, he ran a 4.38 In 12 games this past season for the Cornhuskers, he had 11 pass breakups, 3 tackles for loss, and an interception. I like this pickup here a lot for the Bengals, and I can't help but feel like Zach Taylor's connection to Nebraska had a large part of him taking him here with a 60 pick overall. Because Zach Taylor used to be a quarterback for Nebraska, and he has connections there with the Cornhuskers. So I think that's obviously connection. And with Taylor Britt, some people think this is the best pick here for the Bengals in the draft, and I could definitely see why. I think it's a guy who could honestly maybe start right away. He's going to be competing with outside corner for Eli Apple. But to me, I think it's a very good pickup. These, in my opinion, when you look at this draft for the Bengals, I think Daxton Hill and Cam Taylor-Britt, the corner from Nebraska, are without a doubt probably the 2 best picks in this Bengals draft.
Yeah, and when you trade up to get a player, you are taking the best player available for you. So the fact that they moved up the 3 slots to get him, they felt that he was the best guy that they could get at that spot in the draft. And, that goes back. We were talking about my theory last episode of, you want to get those top 50, top 60 players. And he was actually picked number 60. So, they kind of hit that threshold, kind of the last right up to 60 is where you start getting a drop off after that. And I know it's only 3 spots. I'm glad they traded up. They got the best available. I know Bengal fans are actually really excited about him. It seems like from what I'm seeing on social media, a lot of the fans are more excited about him than Hill. But I think that they're both going to contribute. And I think you're right, Jordan. I think he's going to compete right away. And it also goes back to a guy that can play a couple positions and makes you younger and faster back there.
And when you look at this past season, for the Bengals and really heading into the offseason, I would say one of the more underrated needs was, more depth at, corner, because you have W. Wuzie, you have Mike Hilton, but he's a slot corner. You have Eli Apple. We just cut Trey Waynes. I mean, our corner room was really thin. And then we get a guy like Daxton Hill, like I said, he can play pretty much anything in the secondary. A guy like Taylor Britt, the corner from Nebraska. Both those guys are going to be huge impact players for the next couple of years. Because, if Wuzie goes down, Taylor Britt could, could be really, really good and have a prime opportunity to showcase his skills and showcase why the Bengals selected them with the 60th pick and could be really, really good for us. So in round 3, we ended up taking Zachary Carter, the defensive lineman from Florida. This pick was interesting, and up until this point, this was definitely my least favorite pick. But throughout the draft, it was not my least favorite pick. There's a couple other picks I like least than this, lesser than this. But Zachary Carter, the edge rusher from Florida, I do like his versatility. He can play edge rusher and defensive tackle, which is something I do really like for us because when you look at defensive tackle, we don't have many, great guys there. If DJ Reader goes down, if BJ Hill goes down, we're really, really thin. And, more edge hope there as well with Carter. I like that a bit. This past season with the Florida Gators, he had 11.5 tackles for loss and 7.5 sacks. I see lots of stuff. He was projected to be like a mid-4th or even a 5th round pick. So I think it might be a bit of a reach there. I know the saying, if you like a guy, go ahead and take him because it might not be the next pick. But I don't know. I feel like when you start looking at the 3rd round and after that, I feel like this is kind of where the draft started to go downhill a little bit for the Bengals. I don't hate this pick. I don't love it. I'm just kind of in a man type of deal. It's not great. It's not horrible. But Zachary Carter, the Bengals in the 3rd round. Like I said, not a huge fan of this pick, but I'm interested to see how he's going to fit into the defensive line group.
Yeah, and exactly. I was a little surprised that they took him there too. I was figuring maybe a tight end, but they probably liked him better than the tight ends that were available at that point. And maybe even a wide receiver, which we didn't draft this year. Maybe you steal one in the 3rd round, but the wide receivers that were available, they seem to like him better. And you do bring up the fact, Jordan, that he is position versatile. So he can play inside, he can play outside. From what I've seen, he's a little small to play inside, but I don't know. Maybe he has the quickness to get by guards and whatnot. But it lends itself to a pretty packed defensive end group now when you think about it. I'm not going to rattle off every guy, but you have like 8 or 9 guys. You have your Hubbard, Hendrickson, Osai, Sample, Kareem, even Noah Spence on the practice squad, Wyatt Huber, who they drafted last year. You got a lot of defensive ends, and I don't know if there's room for all these guys on the roster, but it shows you're trying to increase your increase your value in the trenches. So it makes sense that they picked him. I do understand the pick. I thought they might have gone for a different position, but third rounder comes from a good college program. Hopefully he can come in, get in that rotation, and give us some productive snaps.
And that was something else that it was kind of another reason I didn't like that pick much, because there were so many players I liked there who were available with a third round pick and we didn't end up taking. Tariq Woolen, the corner from UTSA, who I've talked about a lot these past couple of weeks, somehow, slid to the 5th round. I was been all for taking him in the 3rd, despite us taking secondary picks in the 1st and 2nd. But Jeremy Ruckert, the tight end from Ohio State, I was absolutely shocked that was not the pick. Because to me, I felt like that was for sure. We have not taken the tight end with the first 2 picks. Ruckert was going to be our 3rd round pick. I feel very confident in that. That's something I've said for the past couple of months. And we take Zachary Carter, who a guy who there's a decent chance he could have been there with our 4th round pick. But it's very interesting because when you look at some of these, positions and players, guys you think the Bengals are going to take, they don't take. I cannot remember his name, the defense tackle from Perion Winfrey, the defense tackle from Oklahoma. I felt for sure the Bengals were taking him in the 2nd round. They liked him a ton. They had visits with him and everything, and they passed on him. So it's so interesting when the Bengals kind of throw you a curveball and you're expecting one thing and they completely do 180 and you're super confused and everything. And that kind of goes with this next pick here. This is 100% my least favorite pick so far for the Bengals, throughout this draft. They drafted offensive lineman from North Dakota State, Cordell Volson. He had 41 starts with North Dakota State. 31 was at right tackle. The Bengals want him to play left guard. I don't get that. Like, I understand he's not going to play right tackle. He's not going to play left tackle because, Collins and Jonah Williams, especially now since he has the 5th-year option. But when you look at this, it just doesn't make sense to me. When you look at all those guys available, even Kennard, the offensive tackle from Kentucky, I thought that would have been a better pick. Tariq Woolen, like I mentioned, a guy from UTSA, I liked a ton. There were so many better players available here. Like I've said, best player available, especially when you look at rounds 4 through 7. I mean, you said yourself, the last video we did, you look at the Bengals' track record since Zach Taylor has been the coach. Day 3 picks turn out to be pretty crappy for us for the most part. We do not get good value picks here in day 3, and this does not make any sense to me. Like, Bengal fans, some Bengal fans are really, really happy about this. I just don't get it because I've seen stuff, Volson might compete at left guard. To me, that is 100% concerning if you're the Bengals. If you're a Super Bowl contending team, you do not want a rookie 4th round pick guy who is switching positions. You're starting left guard. Quentin Spain, our left guard last season, was 100% our best offensive lineman the year we went to the Super Bowl. And now we're more than likely going to be replacing him with a 4th round offensive lineman from North Dakota State who played right tackle, but you're going to move him left guard. This makes I just do not get this at all. And when you look at it, I've said this so many times, when you look at the Bengals offensive line track record, it is god awful. I mean, Jonah Williams, Billy Price, Cedric Ogbuehi, Jake Fisher, you got all these other guys, Jackson Carman. None of those guys have lived up to the hype. And the Bengals have not drafted a good offensive lineman for over a decade. It's to the point, like, if this is our left guard week 1 starting, that's very concerning to me, because if we can't develop a guy like Jonah Williams, who was projected to be this great offensive lineman who has still not proven much at all, what are we going to expect from a 4th round lineman who's switching positions? It just does not make sense to me. I don't get why people would be happy about this. Like I said, Quentin Spain was 100% our best offensive lineman last year. And now when you look at the numbers, giving out the players, somebody was already given 67, which now that kind of, is a very good chance that showing Quentin Spain will probably not be back for the Bengals next year. But I just don't get why you could be content possibly starting a guy at left guard who was a 4th round pick and played at right tackle the most of his collegiate career when you're a Super Bowl contending team. If you have the cap space, which you do, you should have re-signed Quentin Spain instead of drafting the offensive lineman in the 4th and expect him to be, Jonah Williams and this great offensive lineman when those other guys sounding projected to be as good as they were going to be as well.
There's a lot that you said there that I want to comment on, and I agree with pretty much everything that you said. And if you want to go back to a 4th round left guard that became one of the most infamous Bengals in history, Michael Jordan. right? I mean, same thing. A little bit of a reach when they got him, and he was the guy responsible for Burrow, getting injured like that. I hate to pin it on one guy, but I mean, he literally got bowled over, and this can bring flashbacks of those moments. And yeah, I agree with you. I don't like what they've done with the last 2 years with the offensive lineman, like getting someone like Jackson Carman, who's been a pretty successful college tackle, and then moving him to the other side and putting him at guard. And it looks like they want to do the same thing with Volson as well. Now I'm thinking, I don't know if they want him just to be a swing guy and he's not even supposed to compete for the starting position. Maybe they have their idea on Carman and Deontay Smith, and maybe they bring Spain back or whoever is going to be fighting for the left guard position. But, I was thinking that he might just be like a swing tackle, but I've heard Frank Pollock say that they want to give him a shot at left guard, which is very confusing. And I do totally understand what you're saying. What I do like about him is it seems like he's like a real, what, as Pollock says, like a glass eater type, like a real tough guy. He worked in like a heavy labor, and like he's one of those classic tough guys. What I don't like is coming from a small program too. And if you look at our draft this year, the top half of the draft were from bigger programs, the bottom half were from smaller programs, and sometimes it's hit or miss with those guys because they haven't seen the same level of competition. But I forget all the things I wanted to say when you were talking. But yeah, I'm on the same page as you with this. It was a little bit confusing, and I hope they just let him be a swing tackle and not try to force him into left guard and, God forbid, run into a Michael Jordan type situation.
And when you look at it, even if Jackson Carman is our starting left guard, to me, I think that's a little bit concerning. A guy who has shown potential at times, but I still don't think is ready enough to be starting left guard. And then you bring this guy who might be competing for Jackson Carman for the starting left guard. If you're going to have Volson start, I mean, I don't want it to be this year, but okay, have him like kind of have mentored by Quentin Spain for a year. Resign Quentin Spain, because I just don't get why you would not want to re-sign Quentin Spain. I know last year he was our best lineman, and this year he's probably like our, third best lineman because we have so many offensive line upgrades. Our offensive line's a million times better than it was last year. But if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I just don't get why we're looking here now. Jackson Carman and Volson are the two top guys for left guard. A month ago, I mean, we're talking, it's probably likely Spain was going to be re-signed for the Bengals, but it was just going to be till after the draft, unless, they drafted the guy like Zion Johnson in the first round or something like that. But instead, you're getting a guy in the fourth round. I really hope he doesn't start. It's not that I don't like him. I just don't like the pick, and I don't think he should be starting right now because I want what's best for the team. And you don't want to have that one outlier, like you mentioned with Michael Jordan, a guy who was not really good, and you don't want him playing. And if this could, have another, injury for Burrow, I mean, that would absolutely suck. But I don't know. This was definitely the biggest head scratcher to me when you look at draft picks for the Bengals.
Yeah, Jordan, and also I'm wondering if the Bengals front office has a similar thought to me. I think Spain was our best lineman the last 2 years, and I was definitely a big proponent of him. But he had the last play of the Super Bowl was when he just got destroyed by Aaron Donald, like most offensive linemen do in a one-on-one. But maybe there's a bad taste in my mouth from it. And I still like Spain, but I'm just like, man, if he held his block, we talked about it, for a half a second longer, we might have had the greatest touchdown in Super Bowl history. And I'm almost wondering if they saw that and said, hey, here's a guy, Quentin Spain, to say, that played in the biggest stage, biggest game that you could possibly play in, and he failed. And that's the only reason why I couldn't see them bringing him back. And that's the only rationale I have for it, because on paper, he is better than anybody that we're projecting at left guard, and he's a veteran, and he's going to come cheap. So all those things say, why aren't they re-signing him? And I'm just trying to think of maybe why not. Maybe it was maybe it was the Super Bowl. I don't know.
And it's interesting because, I mean, that's a good point because there's not really many other things you can really think of for Spain because he's been reliable. But with that last play, like that's a good point there because that's really the only thing you can really think of for why Spain is not probably going to be the starter for the Bengals. And he's not even on the roster currently. But looking at some of these other picks here, like I said, with some of these picks, we traded up. We traded up twice in this draft. We traded up for Cam Taylor-Britt, the corner from Nebraska. And we also traded up for Toledo defensive back Tyson Anderson. And to me, this pick reminds me a lot of Darius Phillips, a guy who can play special teams, can return as well. He can play corner some, but he's more primarily a special teams guy. Tyson Anderson ran a 4.36 40-yard dash. He is a 3-time team captain. And when you look at the Bengals picks these past couple of years, I think that's something very important. And Zach Taylor and Lou Anamoro, I messed that name up. I feel like I mess that name up all the time. But I feel like that's really
Tom
really
McLeavy from my show calls him Amarillo. So, yeah, but I'm with you.
But when you look at Taylor and when you look at the coaches, it seems like they value team captains a lot. T. Higgins is a team captain, Logan Wilson, Akeem Davis-Gaither, Burrow. They very much value team captains a lot during their collegiate career. And a guy who, Brandon Wilson's coming off an injury. Maybe we see Tyson Anderson maybe in some returns occasionally. Who knows? I don't dislike this pick here. I think it's something. I don't love it. I don't hate it. This is probably my favorite day 3 pick for the Bengals. I like it a decent amount, though.
Yeah, well, it's another guy who's fast in the secondary and can tackle. And that's what they went for this year. Like I said, they didn't really address any really, really pressing needs in this draft. They kind of just took the luxury of taking a bunch of good players. And what I saw in this draft, and I'm going to get to Anderson in a second, was 2 things. One, with the drafting of the safeties or the safety, potentially more than one safety, it's a money move, right? They have to sign Higgins and Wilson and obviously Burrow, and then you're going to have Chase in a couple of years. Like, the salary cap is something that has to always be taken into consideration. And I'm thinking by taking a Daxton Hill in the first round, now you don't have to pay Jesse Bates the $18 million if Hill can be his successor and pan out. And so I'm thinking that some of these picks were money motivated. I mean, that's just my theory on it. But the other thing that the Bengals did this year, and this is something that Marvin Lewis was pretty big on, was having guys that can play more than one position. And if you look at every guy that we've talked about, all 5 of these guys right now all play, basically 2 or more positions. So maybe that was one of the things they came in saying, like, all right, if we're not going to get that tight end that we want, or that starting left guard that we want, or that starting great corner, first round corner that we want, maybe we get guys that are just, like luxuries. And, back to Anderson, having 3 new guys in the secondary, it's a total revamp of that room. And it shows when you look at the undrafted free agents, they didn't take any safeties. And normally with your undrafted, you kind of take one of every position, basically, unless you're really loaded. And this shows that now they're feeling pretty good about that safety room. And Jordan, you mentioned it before, coming into the draft, we didn't have many corners on the roster. And after your first 2 safeties, it's a big question mark with the Wilson injury. And, you have Mike Thomas, who's, a lifetime special teamer. So it made sense that they were going to go after some guys in the secondary, and they did it. And the MO was, let's get guys that can play more than one position. Let's get guys that are going to be cheaper than the veterans that we have there. And let's get guys that are fast and can tackle. And they were consistent with that with all 3 of these picks. And as a Bengal fan, yeah, maybe there's other guys that we wanted to see, but if these are the guys that they're bringing in and they believe in them, I'm all for getting some young blood in that secondary. And maybe that's something now, with everybody running these 4 and 5 wide receiver sets, you only have 2 linebackers on the field in today's game. Maybe this is a glimpse into the future. Maybe this is saying, you want to have guys that are tough enough to be a safety, but quick enough to be a corner. And it feels like almost all 3 of these defensive backs fall into that mode.
And when you look at these 3 defensive backs, I mean, all 3 of these guys ran a 40-yard dash under a 4.4, which is very impressive. And with Tyson Anderson, the guy we're talking about right now, I saw something that maybe he can even be a linebacker. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but I mean, he's 6 foot. I think he's 210 pounds. He ran a 4.36. He can cover pretty well. I don't think that would be horrible. When you look at, Pratt and Wilson, one of those guys go down. I know Marcus Bailey and Joe Bacci, they've played good in the limited snaps they've had, but I don't think you really want to rely on those guys. If Pratt or Wilson goes down, you can have another body at linebacker. I think that's something else to maybe consider. So Anderson, like you're saying, I mean, this is another guy. I mean, he can play safety. corner, maybe linebacker. I mean, he's basically a Swiss Army knife. I mean, playing all these positions. I don't think that would be bad for the Bengals, especially getting a guy, I mean, as late as the 5th round who can play 3 very important positions for a team. If somebody goes down, he can come and plug him at that position and maybe play decent for him.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it at the top of that segment, is that they're looking for him to be a special teamer more than anything. And then to go on what you just said, maybe it's the Trey Flowers blueprint of saying, let's get a corner who we're comfortable throwing on a tight end, or a corner or safety who we're comfortable throwing on a tight end like that. And it seems like all 3 of these guys are in that mold. So maybe, that might be the new NFL. Don't let the tight ends kill you. It's a passing game. You don't need thumper linebackers. You put your 5-6 DBs on the field and play the game.
So with that pick, the Bengals traded up to get Tyson Anderson, and they traded one of their 7th round, their 6th or 7th round picks. I cannot remember which one, but they traded up twice, like I mentioned, and then their final pick of the draft was Coastal Carolina edge rusher Jeffrey Gunter. This past season for Coastal Carolina, he had 36 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, and he's had at least 5 sacks the last 3 seasons for Coastal Carolina. It's another one of those picks. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I will say I was shocked that the Bengals did not maybe take a tight end, running back, wide receiver, one of these picks here. To me, especially when you're having like the 252nd pick overall, I think you always take best player available. I don't really think they did that here. I was surprised they didn't go after maybe a running back like Master Teague from Ohio State, a wide receiver from Indiana, Freifogel or something like that. I think I might be pronouncing that wrong. I know they liked him a ton. Wide receiver from Indiana. I was surprised they didn't go after him. But it's one of those situations where, okay, we didn't take tight end the first couple of rounds. We didn't take wide receiver. Okay, so we'll take one here. And then we take edge rusher. Like I said, I don't hate it. I don't love it. But at this point, I was just kind of shocked that, we went the whole draft without taking a wide receiver or a tight end. That was really confusing to me. And this kind of closed the draft for the Bengals, a very interesting draft. Like I said earlier, a draft I don't think anybody really thought was going to happen. The fact that we went a whole draft with no tight ends, wide receivers, would take Daxton Hill, of all people, in the first, and then Cam Taylor-Britt, the corner from Nebraska, in the second. But this draft overall was really interesting because there were so many players you thought the Bengals were going to take, and they really didn't take any of them. And that's kind of why, to me, I think it's one of the more interesting drafts the Bengals had in recent memory.
Yeah, on paper, it's one that you're like, is this draft going to work? But again, you're picking 31st. And even during the draft, one of the analysts was saying that the Patriots have a history of not drafting that well. And I'm like, you know what? It makes sense now, because you might be like, oh, yeah, they had some pretty poor drafts. They haven't developed a lot of players. Brady carried that team for so long. But when you think about it, now we're in the Patriots boat of picking like 31st, 32nd every year. It's we see the pain in that. Your second round pick is basically a third rounder. Your third round pick is basically a fourth rounder, et cetera, et cetera. And then so anyway, that's one thought. But back to the seventh rounder, yeah, that goes to what I was saying before. Now you got like 8-9 guys battling for that defensive end spot. And this is a problem that I see in the NFL league wide is, like last year they drafted Wyatt Huber in the seventh round. Granted, he got hurt. But now this year you're drafting another guy in the seventh round, and it almost kind of negates Hubert from last year. It's like Hubert was hurt, so it's kind of a different story. But assuming that he was healthy, and you're drafting another guy at his position in the same round, you don't give the other guys time to develop. And I know everything is a win now league, and that's the society that we live in. Is everything is instant gratification. But when you start drafting the same positions that you did last year in the same spots, you really like pushing out the guys that you drafted the year before almost makes it seem like wasted picks. So that was really the first thing that came to my mind when they picked up Gunter. I don't know much about him. I saw that he had a bunch of sacks. He was very productive, but then again, he did play for a small school. But he's a Bengal now. We're rooting for him, but it does add to the overall confusion of this draft. But I guess we just have to believe in the front office because they've had a couple good drafts in a row. And, I'm hoping that carries true for this draft as well.
And you mentioned Wyatt Huber, and that's a great point there. That was something I kind of thought of, after the draft to him as well. When you have all these edge rushers and, Carter from, Florida, a guy who was kind of a reach for the Bengals. But since he was a third-round pick, he's clearly going to make the team. And then when you look at Cam Sample, a guy who hasn't played a lot, but he's kind of showed some promise. Then you look at guys like Khalid Kareem, Wyatt Huber, Gunter, the guy we're talking about right now. When you look at everybody, all these guys going to be battling out that final edge spot, but you could have prevented this kind of situation by maybe drafting a different position for a guy who could add more value and have a bigger impact to the team than a final edge spot that, none of the guys are bad, but you just have too many guys and you're only going to be able to have one spot. It's going to make it interesting to see who gets the final edge spot. But yeah, this draft was really, really interesting. So Friday, I think it was a couple of hours before day 2 of the draft started. And this was before, the Bengals drafted Carter and Britt, the corner from Nebraska. It was announced the Bengals, picked up the 5th-year option on offensive tackle Jonah Williams. And we talked just a couple of days before it happened. We were both in agreement that the Bengals should absolutely not do it. And it's really weird to me because I feel like I'm one of the few people, and you've said too that you expect more from Jonah Williams. It seems like everybody is just giving Jonah Williams this pass for whatever reason. Like, he's not lived up to the hype at all. Like, at what point are we going to be holding him responsible for his inconsistent and bad play? And it's interesting because when we talked about it, I was totally against it. But I think it was the day 1 of the draft. There's reports of Jackson Carman and, an assault case and everything like that. And it's going to be under investigation. And then it was to the point where, I don't want the Bengals, picking up the 5th-year option for Jonah Williams. But with that point with Jackson Carman and his future with the Bengals, in question, it felt like they had to do it. Like, they really had no choice at that point because we are, like, before day 2 and day 3 of the draft, we were still kind of thin at some extra bodies at offensive line group. So you can't really, let's say a Jackson Carman gets suspended or whatever, even gets cut. And then you look at Jonah Williams. If you only have him for that one more year, you're going to have to look for more offensive linemen. So I don't like it, but I like it more than I did a couple weeks ago, just due to the fact, like, they really had no choice because of that Jackson Carman situation. So, he's set to make $12.6 million in the 2023 season. So it should be interesting, and hopefully he starts playing like he should be for a top 15 pick.
Yeah, we talked about it, Jordan. Let him just earn it one more year. Just see what he does this year, and then you figure it out. Then you give him I think a lot of the decisions, draft-wise and this Jonah decision, come down to money. They're like, all right, you know what? If we give him the 5th-year option, now we're getting a left tackle for $12.6 million. Good luck finding a really quality one out there for that price tag. So I think it was semi-money motivated. And it feels like the Bengals organization likes Jonah Williams more than the fans, or at least more than the observations that you and I have made, which I feel he's underachieved. And you brought up some stats in the last episode. I think he let up 10 sacks, and it was either 20-something pressures or even 30 pressures. And those are bad numbers. He's our guy. He's a Bengal. I love him, but those are bad numbers. And so it makes me think that they see him every day at practice. We don't. They watch every step he takes in a game. We don't necessarily do that. So maybe they're seeing something that we don't see. But I'm thinking that it's partially money motivated, and maybe they're looking at the crop for 2023. All right, aside from the draft picks, we're the Bengals. We're going to be deep in the playoffs. We're going to be picking in the late 20s, 30s again. So we're not going to be able to grab one of those top flight tackles. And maybe they're seeing the free agents. I don't know the free agents that are available, but whoever's available in 2023, maybe they're like, wow, there's pretty slim pickings out there. Let's keep this guy around. But yeah, I don't know. Just let him prove it one more time. And if you want to think like, all right, well, they didn't want to demotivate him. They didn't want him to feel not wanted. But that's what they did with Jesse Bates. Jesse Bates is feeling not wanted, right? They didn't pick up his option, and they drafted 2 or 3 guys that play the same position as him. So I can't even use that as an excuse that they didn't want to demotivate him. But the coaching staff knows more about this player than we do, and that's the truth. But I believe a lot of it was money motivated.
Like I said, I don't like it at all, but I understand it with that Jackson Carmen situation. Like they're kind of trapped. Like they're kind of, I don't know. I don't think guilt is the right word, but they kind of had to. Like, I don't know. Like it's one of those situations where there's no reason that Jonah Williams should not be our best offensive lineman right now. I mean, really. I mean, he was a first round pick and he still hasn't lived up to the hype at all. And I mean, we're heading into year 4 this year, and we're still trying to see even half of what we thought Jonah Williams was going to be. And, his 5th year is going to be in 2023. Like I said, $12.6 million in 2023. So he'll be a free agent in 2024. That's one of the more reasons I don't really like it. 2024, Bengal fans talking about, we're going to be in the Super Bowl. We're going to be in the AFC Championship game for so many years. I hope that's true. But our winning window at 2024 takes a significant drop. 2024 offseason, we're going to have T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Jonah Williams, Logan Wilson, Chidobe Awuzie, all free agents. And I know there's at least 2 or 3 other starters I'm forgetting because I was just talking to somebody the other day about this. But that is super concerning. And that's going to be after Joe Burrow gets his, I would say, historic contract extension, because there's already talks he's going to have one of the biggest, deals in NFL history. So when you look at just another starter who's going to be a free agent in the 2024 offseason, that's something else the Bengals kind of screwed up there, because that's going to be somebody else they're going to try to, offer, but they're not going to have as nearly as much money. But I don't know. Like, it's going to be really interesting with Jonah Williams. And then, I mean, even right now, I mean, we're talking about Jonah Williams like a year or 2 from now. But, I mean, Jesse Bates, we have no idea what's going to happen to him. This could be his final year as a Bengal. And, I think I mentioned this a month or so ago. When the Bengals drafted Jesse Bates, they liked him quite a bit. And during that preseason, they cut George Aloka. I was so distraught. Aloka is one of my favorite Bengal players of all time. And they realized, Bates is going to be the future. Aloka was a huge part of that Bengals team for so many years. There was a season where the only play that George Aloka was not in was a kneel down play. Like, he was so important to that defense. And then you look at it with Jesse Bates. We draft Daxton Hill. We draft a couple other guys in the secondary. I mean, this could be Bates' last season. You really don't know. But, I mean, there's lots of question marks. I know we're a couple months away from the season, but there's so many question marks once we get closer to, for the regular season, because we just don't know what's going to happen to Jesse Bates. We're talking about Jonah Williams, but, I mean, Bates, I was talking to somebody today about it. I mean, you don't know if they would, offer, if he'd be on a trade block, if they'd be willing to do a contract extension, if he would hold out, if he would want to trade because I don't know if he felt upset, they drafted Daxton Hill. It's really interesting because there's lots of different possibilities that could end up possibly happening with Jesse Bates.
Yeah, and I like the way you're talking about that window of winning. You're right, because the Burrow deal is going to be historic. There's no way they can bring back Jesse Bates if we're going to give Joe Burrow $50 million a year or whatever it's going to be. And so I think you called it right on that. I guess the only thing we can hope for with Burrow is after a couple of years of great success, he pulls a Tom Brady and like either takes a pay cut or restructures so we can get some guys around him. But we have to pay Burrow. I don't care what he wants. He's getting exactly what he wants, because that's a generational player. And everyone throws that term around. But I mean, we saw it, guys. We saw it. We saw a second-year quarterback with an atrocious offensive line go to the Super Bowl, come within a minute and a half of winning it. We're still seeing these other teams and these other quarterbacks. Like, is Justin Fields going to be anything in year 2? And, they're still waiting for Daniel Jones and those guys to develop over here in New York. And, we got a guy, the light went on right away, and it's someone that we have to keep long-term. But it does reduce the window. And I think we mentioned this in the last episode, was something like the Seahawks. And I know I'm going a few years back, and there's probably some more recent examples. But, they had that incredible defense, but they had to re-up Russell Wilson. And their window was when Russell Wilson was on a 3rd-round pick salary, so they could give all the other guys all the money and build a team around him. But when it was time to pay him, you started seeing all the big names go. And we're going to see some of that when we re-sign Burrow. And as fans, we have to understand there is a salary cap, and that's why you have different teams going deep into the playoffs, into the Super Bowl almost every year. And that's one of the good things about the NFL. But it's not sustainable. You can't keep all your good players. You have to keep getting younger, cheaper players, and we're seeing that already with Daxton Hill versus Jesse Bates.
And I believe DJ Reader is another one of those guys as well. So when you have so many key contributors in offense and defense all going to be free agents 2024 offseason, I mean, like we're saying, this Jesse Bates contract, it might not affect them big part right now, but when that 2024 offseason comes around, that's going to affect them so much. And I think that's something, they're going to look at because also might have to do with Jesse Bates with the guaranteed money. Obviously, it's well known the Bengals aren't really fond of giving a ton of guarantee money. Trey Hendrickson, he did not have a huge guaranteed money with his contract when they signed with him. And that was part of the reason why Carl Lawson decided to sign with the Jets. So it's interesting with Bates. And with this window, when you look at 2024, I hope we win a Super Bowl by then. I think we still can as long as we have Burrow as a quarterback. But if we win a Super Bowl, I feel like that maybe might encourage or might have some of these players like Higgins boy might take a pay cut. Since you've already won a Super Bowl, maybe you'll take a pay cut, and so you have a chance to win another one. But with all these players going to be free agents in just a couple of years, it's kind of concerning. And like this window, winning a championship, as long as we have Joe Burrow as a quarterback, we're always going to have that window to win a championship. But with all those guys, I feel like that's going to be kind of concerning once we get to that point.
Yeah, 100%. And with the pay cut, you could see someone like a Tom Brady or a Joe Burrow when you're making like insane money to take pay cuts. But when you're looking more at your T. Higgins and guys like that, they know you have maybe 8 years. If you're lucky, you have 8 years to make your money in the NFL. So a lot of these guys are going to be like, yeah, I love the team. I want to win, but the league doesn't care about me and I have to provide for my future. So I don't see a lot of guys taking pay cuts on any team outside of the quarterback position. So, hopefully the salary cap goes up. Hopefully we get lucky with some of the younger guys panning out. But yeah, we're forecasting it already. We're seeing there's going to be some cap issues with this team in a couple of years. And we're not used to that. Like the last 2-3 years, it's like, oh, we could sign $100-200 million worth of guys because we had a cheap quarterback and cheap wide receivers, right? Chase and Higgins, they're on rookie deals. So, it makes sense in that regard, but eventually everyone has to pay the piper and it's going to happen. I almost don't even want to talk about that right now because I'm so excited about this year and I don't want to get down and think that we're going to hit any kind of slump. But yes, it's a definite concern for the future.
And, we've kind of talked about, with all the players going to be free agents coming up and, with Bates and, talking about the Bengals draft, the draft, like we said, was not really what we expected it to be. And then a couple of days after the draft, there was another move. It's kind of surprising. I did not really expect it. And that was the Bengals re-signing punter Kevin Huber. This was really interesting because it felt like most Bengal fans felt like, Drew Chrisman, a guy who's been in the practice squad majority this past year, a punter from Ohio State, was going to be our punter this year if we did not draft a punter. Most Bengal fans thought we were going to take a punter, and we ended up not, drafting one. But instead, we signed Huber to a one-year deal, which is interesting because it just seemed like this past year he was not himself, which is really, really interesting because when you look at it, he actually had a better year this past year than the year before, which I feel when you look at it, I feel like we kind of expect more from Huber and we're not as pleased with, his yards per punt because we're expecting more because we're in more, winnable games. We're doing better, so we expect more from Huber. When Huber had a good season and the 2020 year, we won 4 games. He had a better he had a better 2021 season than the better 2020 season. But it's interesting because when you look at Huber, he had a decent year when you look at his yards per punt. It was one of the better ones of his whole entire career. But since we're, in more winnable games and since these are must-win games, you're just kind of expecting more from him. But I'm just kind of surprised that we ended up re-signing him. Clearly, I feel like at this point, it means that the Bengals aren't really high on Chrisman as they thought they were going to be. Maybe he hasn't improved as much, in practice and everything, what he was going to be. But Huber with the Bengals for one more year is kind of wild because I did not think this was going to be happening at all.
Yeah, and again, you always say a lot of things that inspire me. There's a million thoughts as you're saying that. And Well, one of the things with Huber is I think he's having a little bit of a hip issue as he's getting older. I mean, you're punting for that long, the body's going to start to break down. And I think that's what's contributing to the reduction in yards per punt for him. But he did have a good year punting, inside. I always look at inside the 20 and touchbacks, like almost more than net yardage. And I know that they're all kind of equal and all big factors, but he's still very good on the inside the 20 and minimal touchbacks. So that's a big advantage. But we can read between the lines here. The fact that they waited till after the draft, they definitely were going to go for one of those punters, and they're in the draft. And all three of the draftable punters got taken pretty early, which is like the Evan McPherson effect, which I think we've also talked about, is, people aren't afraid to take a specialist early enough if he can be a real game changer. And we saw that with Evan McPherson, a fifth rounder who won 4 or 5 games for us last year. But as far as Huber goes, I want to have him back for one more year. He's one game away from breaking the record of most games played by a Bengal. And records, who cares? We just want to win games. But he's been a lifetime Bengal. He's from Cincinnati. He's still got a little bit left in the tank. And we have a very good shot at going deep into the playoffs and hopefully the Super Bowl. And this would be a great cap off to his career. And Jordan, the other thing that you bring up, I agree with 100%. And I don't think that they believe in Chrisman as much as we want them to. We see the young guy with the big leg, and he's another guy from Ohio, and it just seems like the logical replacement for Huber. But the fact he had the broken hand last year, so that factored in a lot. But the fact that they were just so willing to waive him, and if any other team takes him, let him take him. We picked him up, waived him, maybe like 3 or 4 times last year. And you don't do that with an asset that you want to keep around. So maybe what they're seeing out of Chrisman isn't enough. And, Coach Simmons is one of the best special teams coaches in the league. And, I want to defer to his eyes and someone who sees these guys every day. And he might be seeing the same things that you're seeing, that maybe Chrisman isn't the guy or still a year away. You want to let Huber ride off into the sunset, maybe. There's also the factor of not breaking up the trio of McPherson, Harris, and Huber because they were so successful. I know there was an article on Bengals.com, and this is something I've said before I even read the article. I value him as a holder. Holding is tough. I don't know if anyone out there has ever done it, but it is tough. You have to have perfect hands, perfect placement, one stupid mess up, and you're the most hated villain in town. It's such a high pressure job. And I'm wondering if that factored in too. Chrisman with the broken hand, maybe he's still not ready. Maybe they don't trust him to be as good of a holder. I don't know. I don't know what's going on, but I agree with you 100%. And just to piggyback on that, I'm a little upset that they brought in someone to compete with Clark Harris. And I know you want to have competition at every spot, but I have a soft spot for Clark Harris. He looks like one of my best friends, which is in itself, it makes you instantly like the guy. He's from New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey, whatever. But the thing about Clark Harris is he's had a perfect career. He's never had a bad snap. He has never, 12 years, whatever he's played, 13 years, not one bad snap. And last year was no different. Even in the Super Bowl, I'm like, oh my God, this could be the time where you get one, just because he's never messed up and it's such a high pressure situation. Every snap was perfect. So it's like, I know you want to push everybody and everything. I wouldn't have done it with Harris. I would have just let him have the one more year. Maybe longer, hopefully longer. But I know I'm going off topic, but I wish they didn't bring in someone to compete with him, because again, a lot of it is morale, right? The morale with, all right, Jonah Williams, we re-signed him. There's the morale. Jesse Bates, we're messing with his morale. Are you messing a little bit with Clark Harris? I know it's just a specialist, but it's such an important spot. I don't know. Yeah, just on a tangent. I'm sorry, Jordan.
No, I completely agree. When I looked at the undrafted free agents that they signed, I saw long snapper. I was so frustrated because, Clark Harris has done so much. This long snapper is not going to make the team unless Clark Harris has a unfortunate injury. When you could have signed a guy like Reed Blankenship, a safety from Middle Tennessee, when you could have signed the wide receiver from Clemson, Justin Ross, who was supposed to be a 3rd round pick. You could have signed so many guys who actually can make the team and can contribute to the team. When you look at Alex Erickson, he was an undrafted free agent, was a good returner for a couple of years. Vontaze Burfict was an undrafted free agent, and whether Bengal fans who might not like him like it or not, he's one of the best defensive players the Bengals have ever had in franchise history, and one of the most disrespected players in NFL history. I mean, I can get a whole tangent on that one too. But when you look at it, they had a chance. I mean, this was the year of the draft. There were so many players who went undrafted, and like he's supposed to be drafted in the 4th round. How did he not get signed? Even a guy like Carson Strong, a quarterback who was really slow, but most people thought he was going to be like the 5th round. He was limited mobility. I would have been all for the Bengals signing him as an undrafted free agent to compete with Brandon Allen for the second string job at quarterback, because Brandon Allen, in his limited times playing, hasn't done much. I completely agree with that, and I feel like that's something that isn't being talked about. And I'm not trying to like nitpick on stuff, but when you look at things and you look at the Bengals and you know what they can do to improve, you want them to improve. And when they don't do the things that can make their team better, you get frustrated. And that's something else when talking about getting your team better. It was announced, I believe yesterday, the New York Giants released James Bradbery, the corner. Some Bengal fans want him, some Bengal fans don't. I see no issue trying to sign him. We have the cap space to sign him. Some people think he's going to want $13 million. He will not sign $13 million. I think if he signed with the Bengals, it'll be seven or 8. And it's one of those deals. All right, do you want to sign Bradbury? Do you want to sign Larry Ogunjobi? Or do you want to sign Quentin Spain? We already talked about Quentin Spain. I don't think he's coming back. Larry Ogunjobi, it's questionable. Maybe he does come back on a cheaper deal. But then Bradbury, you could have more bodies at corner, a guy who's been around the league for quite some time, one of the better corners in the league, and maybe he wants to, ring chase with the Bengals. I have no issue with, signing him. I see some people, is he that much better than Eli Apple? Okay, well, but what if Eli Apple gets hurt? And I mean, we're screwed. Okay, we did draft Daxton Hill. We did draft, the guy from Nebraska. We did draft Tyson Anderson, but those guys have never played an NFL snap in their career. Okay, having extra bodies is great, but at the same time, you want to have guys who have experience, and Bradbury has that experience. So to me, I think the Bengals would be stupid not to look into possibly signing Bradbury. It would be a great move for the Bengals to sign him.
Yeah, and I don't know what kind of year Bradbury had last year because I wasn't really paying attention, but I know the 2 years prior, he was excellent. And you're thinking, like, yeah, you have the money, you can get this guy, and now corner is not an issue, no matter who goes down. If you have Bradbury and Awuzie goes down for a period of time, you still have someone that can pretty much fill in there. So, yeah, I know we see it all the time. Whenever there's like a good player that's waived, you always want your team to grab him. But, I mean, this guy really makes sense unless they're just going to sit on that $8 million and try to roll it into next year. I don't know the plan, but, yeah, there's 3 guys, Spain, Ogunjobi, or someone like Bradbury or some other free agent that's still out there, but those are all possibilities. And I guess given my choice out of those 3, I would probably go with Bradbury at this point. I mean, I love Ogunjobi, but the foot is a concern. And Bradbury, you're done with your secondary. You're done. Get him on a 2-year deal, and you're done for 2 years. You don't even have to think about the defensive backfield. And so many organizations struggle with poor defensive backs, and we've had our down years at that position. And this would be a real good answer to that. But I almost feel like we're not going to do it, in a lot of cases. Like, remember when Larry Warford came available a couple years back? It seemed like he would be a big, solid addition to the offensive line. We didn't sign. There's so many guys like that they become available, and you think they'd be a great fit, and then your team just doesn't pull the trigger for either financial reasons or, like I said before, maybe they know something about these guys that we just don't know.
And you mentioned the cap rollover. So let's say like $8-10 million. That would totally be enough money for Bradbury, Ogunjobi, or Spain. With Spain, like I said, with somebody getting 67, that pretty much confirms that I don't think they're going to sign him. That's something else. When you look at even this past season with the Bengals on like their practice squad and everything like that, there was never a player who had the jersey number 97. So in the back of my mind, what if there's a chance the Bengals re-sign Atkins because nobody picked up 97? You don't have that same situation for Spain, so it's kind of like, well, they're not going to sign him. Ogunjobi, I saw something today. Him and DJ Reader are real good friends and everything. I do think that would not be bad at all. And with Ogunjobi's foot injury, okay, maybe sign him in a couple months once he's can pass a physical. I don't think that would be bad, and it would give you more experienced bodies at defensive tackle because if Hill or Reader go down, we're in trouble. just like with corner. I mean, we're not as in trouble as we were a couple weeks ago. But if Awuzie goes down, we have these guys like Hill and Britt, but we don't have experience bodies. And that's where Bradbury could, be great for us. Let's say, 2 for 25 or something like that. I don't think bad. But with the cap rollover, I think it's interesting. Maybe the Bengals don't sign Bradbury and have that $8 million rolled over to next season because, that could be money towards Bates. That could be money towards a tight end because, Hayden Hurst and Drew Sample are both free agents. We're going to have to do something there. There's a couple other guys who are free agents as well, like Jermaine Pratt. But there's lots of different scenarios and lots of different possibilities the Bengals could be making with different moves these next couple of months.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And especially with having a little bit of money left over, there's a lot. And what you mentioned about Ogunjobi, I can almost see him being someone that we sign in October after there's an injury and get him at a bargain price.
That would be absolutely perfect for us, especially for a team like if we don't have great, guys at defense tackle. We have Hill and Reader, but after that, we don't have a whole lot of, guys who have made an impact. If we get Ogunjobi back, that would be great. I know you're a big fan of him. I think, don't you like him more than BJ Hill?
I did. If I was given the choice between both of them healthy, I would have taken Ogunjobi. And, Jordan, the one thing, though, I think Tupou had a good year last year. I don't think he's had a great career. And, I respect him. He's one of our guys. But I thought last year in a rotation that he was very effective. Now, I don't know if he could handle being the starter if there was a major injury. But I don't mind him as a number 3 at this point. So we are a little thin at that position, but I do trust him as a backup.
I agree with that because that's kind of like how I was talking earlier with Marcus Bailey and Joe Bacci. Like guys who can come in who they're reliable. If you need them to do something, they're capable of doing it, but you don't really want that guy starting, especially on a team who's a championship contender.
Yeah, agreed.
So, looking at it here, we talked about, the Bengals draft picks and, all the results, what we thought about each pick. We also kind of talked about, Kevin Huber being re-signed, Junior Williams' 5th-year option being picked up by Cincinnati, and if the Bengals should go after James Bradbery, the corner from the New York Giants. So, Frank, can you kind of tell some of the listeners we can follow you on social media?
Yeah, without a doubt. The last thing I wanted to say was Vontaze Burfict. In one of these future episodes, you and I have to talk about that man because any Bengal fan that doesn't respect him didn't see enough of him playing. He was an enforcer on defense. He gave that defense, you want, like, I hate to say like a Ray Lewis because he's the enemy, but he was like our Ray Lewis, and I have a lot of respect for him as a player. But anyway, yes, the name of my podcast is called The Unofficial Bengals Podcast, and you can find me on Instagram or Twitter at Cincy Bengals Pod.
Yeah, I completely agree with Burfict. In my opinion, he's my favorite Bengal of all time. One of the most disrespected players the NFL has ever seen. If he was with the Steelers, we all know he'd be a first ballot Hall of Famer, and he'd be glorified every single freaking play. But since he's with the Bengals and the NFL hates the Bengals, we should just get him out of the league. But that's another time, like you said, because I can go in the whole hour conversation about how underrated he is and how great he was and everything like that. Make sure to go follow Frank. I'll put the descriptions below, with his Instagram, Twitter, and also his podcast. That about does it for this video. If you're new to the channel or you've seen my videos before, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I would really, really appreciate it. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time on Sports.